What's the creepiest thing a child has ever said that genuinely made your blood run cold? Story 1. My 5-year-old son had been having trouble staying asleep at night, so my wife and I started giving him a melatonin gummy as part of his bedtime routine. After a few weeks, it seemed to help. He was sleeping through the night, but his mood in the mornings had shifted. He'd wake up irritable and snappish, which wasn't like him at all. One night, my wife and I were in our bedroom, which faces his. From our bed, we could see straight into his room. We were talking quietly about his mood changes after he'd fallen asleep when we heard a low growl. Our dog, who had been sleeping at the foot of our bed, jumped up immediately, ears perked, staring into our son's room. We both turned to look, and there he was, sitting upright in bed, eyes open, pointing at us. Then, in a hoarse, guttural voice that didn't sound like him at all, he growled, "It's because of you! You two did this!" My wife and I just froze, our eyes wide as silver dollars. We glanced at each other out of the corners of our eyes, both silently thinking, what in the world was that? When we looked back at our son, he was lying down again, fast asleep like nothing had happened. My wife nudged my arm, basically saying, "You go check on that." So I did what any brave dad pretends to do. I went in. He was sound asleep, blanket pulled up, mouth open, snoring softly like a log. I touched his forehead, half expecting him to be burning up, but no, he was cool as a cucumber. I looked back at my wife and she was staring at me, wide-eyed like, what the heck is going on? I just shrugged. How was I supposed to know? I left the room, got back into bed, and the rest of the night was quiet. Morning came, and everything seemed normal. Our son woke up cheerful, ate breakfast like usual. So I asked casually how he'd slept, if he was okay, if he'd had any dreams. He said, "I just remember seeing that lady in there with you in the hallway. You said she was my Grammy, but she was angry about something. I don't remember what." My mom, his Grammy, had passed away 9 years before he was even born. Needless to say, we stopped giving him melatonin real quick. Story 2. I told my mother when I was about 3 that I didn't like the lady in the basement, or that she kept trying to make me put my hand in the wall. She asked which lady, and I said from the picture, and took her to the basement. Hidden away in a closet were a bunch of old photos and a weird, painted, really old-fashioned portrait. The woman was the previous owner of the house, which was not owned by her brother, our landlord. She had passed away in the basement while trying to do laundry, as she was advanced in age and stubborn about getting help in spite of her bad health. The portrait was apparently some family tradition. The brother had one too, and so did his parents. A lot of her things were still in the house we were renting. After we found the portrait, I took her to a wall and told her the hole was there. My mom moved some boxes out of the way, and sure enough, there was a hole about the size of a child's fist on the ground being covered. I still remember showing her the hole, vaguely. I also remember seeing the woman wandering around down there in a sort of dreamlike memory kind of way. Super tiny woman, face kind of obscured by wrinkles in a way that is hard to explain because in retrospect it didn't look natural, but to a kid she just had a weird face, and wearing a white nightgown with little flowers on it. Anyway, my mom had always been creeped out by the basement, but I played down there. I wasn't allowed to play down there anymore. Growing up, I remembered the lady in the hole, but nothing else, and she never discussed it again. We lived there the rest of the year, then moved as soon as we could. But it wasn't until I brought up the old lady, when we were talking about the house, at 16, that my mom filled in the blanks. Which was crazy to me, because in my mind I thought the old lady who owned the house would just come over in her nightgown and that she was just kind of complaining about the wall hole. She really wanted me to reach there. Story 3. A few years ago, my favorite uncle succumbed to lung cancer in Sri Lanka. My family and I had been booked to fly out and see him in 10 days, but he lost the battle before I got there. I had been scared to see him so weak, but I still wanted him to know how much I loved him, and for him to meet my youngest child as he had met the oldest the year before. He and my aunt had wanted but never had kids, so a few of my cousins and I filled that gap over the years. He was the uncle who told stories, played games, and was just fun to mess around with. Other cousins of mine may argue, but I was definitely his favorite, which was why I was so desperate to see him one last time, and perhaps why the following event happened. We flew out to Sri Lanka anyway, to see my aunt and spend time with our huge family. My oldest daughter was just 2, and my youngest was just a year old then. My aunt had been nervous to be home alone, as many people in Sri Lanka are for the first few weeks after passing away since the wake is done at home. My extended family stayed with her on rotation, and we offered to stay 2 nights while we were there. On the second evening, we had a dinner party to go to, and my aunt decided to visit a friend/neighbor. While on our way back, she told us to go to her home and that she would stay with her friend and come in the morning. It didn't faze us at the time that we'd be alone in her house, and we agreed. As we parked in front of the house, my youngest was asleep, but my then 2-year-old was still up. In my half-sanity of trying to get everyone and everything out of the car, All I heard was my always fussy 2-year-old being extra fussy and loud, and I just didn't want her to wake the little one. I let my husband take her while I carried the little one. Once we got to our room, I put the baby down and began unloading the diaper bag. When I realized that my husband was sitting on the edge of the bed, hugging my 2-year-old, she clung to him, pointing to the doorway and repeating the words, "Man, coming, man, coming." My husband, who isn't easily emotional, looked completely and utterly freaked out. "Did she just say, 'man coming'?" I asked him. He proceeded to tell me that when she got out of the car, she was pointing to the front door and said, "Man there, man there." He had no choice but to bring her inside, as I had been oblivious and he was in shock. Apparently, she had been saying man there all the way through the house till she got to our room. Then it changed to "man coming." We both looked at each other, then looked in the direction she was pointing, and then again at each other. My husband suggested we leave, and I was beyond freaked out, but then it occurred to me that if the man, my uncle, were really there, he'd never hurt me or my family, and suddenly I just wanted to see what else could possibly happen. My oldest was still saying the 2 words, and I told my husband to calm her down while I got some milk for her. As I walked to the kitchen, I quietly asked my uncle for a sign so I could know it was him. After getting the milk and going back to the room, my daughter was relatively calm, but my husband looked even more freaked. I gave her the milk, and he began to tell me how she kept saying, "man, coming" for a little while after I left, except that suddenly she buried her head into his chest, as she did when she was shy, something she did with every new or unfamiliar person she met at the time, but then she would peek out and smile shyly and hide and repeat. He said it was like someone was trying to make her laugh. That sounds exactly like what my uncle would do. Story 4. When I was about 5 or 6, I went into the kitchen to get a drink of water. My mom and stepdad were sitting at the table. I headed for the cabinet to grab a glass, but stopped suddenly and turned toward the doorway leading into the formal dining room. I walked over and stood there for a few seconds, looking upward as if at someone. I didn't say a word, just nodded, like I was quietly acknowledging them. After about 15 or 20 seconds, I turned back, got my glass, poured some water, and started drinking. Halfway through, I paused, turned to my parents, and asked, "Where did the man in the blue shirt go?" They froze. Then they both jumped up and searched the house from top to bottom. But there was no one there, just the 2 of them, me and my siblings asleep in their rooms. They asked me what the man looked like, so I described him, just a few small details, but clear enough. My mom and stepdad looked at each other, completely silent, then told me to go back to bed. Years later, my mom told me what really happened. My stepdad's uncle had passed away the week before. They'd been very close and had once promised each other that if there was something after death, they'd find a way to let the other know. The man I described matched his uncle perfectly, even the blue barber's shirt he always wore. My stepdad was a barber too, but he only ever wore white ones. I had never met the man, never seen a picture of him, and had no memory of that night at all. My mom told me about it when I was 18. She said it was the strangest thing she had ever seen one of her kids do. Story 5. When my youngest was about 3, we were walking to nursery one morning, and she just casually started telling me all about her grandma from before. Now, my own mom is very much alive, so I was a little confused. I asked what she meant, and she launched into this long ramble about this other grandma, the one she had before. According to her, this grandma had purple hair and glasses, loved to take her to France, and even lived in the very area we were in at that moment. She said it all with this cheerful, matter-of-fact tone, like it was the most normal thing in the world. At first, I was just amused. I figured she was making up some imaginary story, so I played along and said, "Oh really? That sounds nice. Where did she live?" Without hesitation, she goes, "I'll show you." So now we're walking down the high street, a direction we had literally never walked together before. She's holding my hand, chattering away the entire time about grandma from before and all the little details about her life. It wasn't like the vague rambling of a toddler either. It was oddly specific. Then, suddenly, she just stops dead in her tracks, won't move another inch. She gets this faraway look in her eye, almost like she's listening to something only she can hear. Or maybe she was remembering something. Her whole energy changed at that moment. And then she looks up at me and says, very calmly, "She's not here now. Okay, let's go to the nursery." I look around to figure out where the heck we've stopped, and we are standing directly in front of the damn funeral home. I swear to you, I got goosebumps all over my body. I didn't say a word. Didn't dare ask any follow-up questions. Just took her hand and walked the rest of the way to the nursery, trying not to visibly freak out. She never mentioned grandma from before again. I still think about that moment sometimes, and every single time it makes me shiver. Story 6. When my daughter was little, we lived with my parents until she was about 3, and let me just say, their house is haunted as hell. I always felt it, but once we moved in, whatever was in that house seemed to start focusing on her instead of me. One night I was in bed, half asleep, when I heard her voice through the baby monitor. At first, I figured she was just babbling in her crib, so I lay there listening, trying to make out the words. Then suddenly, just static. Loud, sharp static. I bolted out of bed and ran into her room. She was standing in her crib, pointing straight at the ceiling. I asked, "Who were you talking to, baby?" She looked at me, shrugged, and said, "He's gone now." Nope, absolutely not. Fast forward a bit. We'd moved into another house, one where my great-aunt had passed away about 5 months earlier. One day, I couldn't find my keys anywhere, so I asked my daughter if she'd seen them. She said yes. Relieved, I asked, "Okay, can I have them then?" Her face went completely serious. "He told me not to tell you." At this point, I'm like, "Who's he?" She said, "The upside-down man. He doesn't like you." And that was it. She never explained further. To make it worse, she'd constantly have conversations in her room, full-on talking to someone. I'd hear her through the door, pauses like she was listening, little responses, laughter, the whole thing. And she was tiny, way too young to be making that up in such detail. It freaked me out every single time. Story 7. As a kid, I was terrified of the dark because I was convinced there was a witch living in my closet. Fast forward to my teenage years, and I started seeing something I still can't fully explain. A demon, maybe, or psychosis. Who knows? It was this horror movie kind of woman. Long, stringy hair, gangly fingers, the whole 9 yards. One night, she grabbed me. Middle of the night, clear as day. I still don't know if it was sleep deprivation, psychosis, or a literal demon. Now, years later, I'm living in the same house. My sister and her little girl moved in. She's about 3. We'd been careful not to mention monsters or anything scary, and she'd never had any problems with the dark. Then one day, she came to us and said, completely serious, "There's a witch in my closet." My blood ran cold. My sister and I didn't say anything to each other, just grabbed some spray bottles and mixed up monster spray for her to use at night. We went through the motions, sprayed the house, reassured her, and that was that. We never brought it up again. I'm sure this is all a coincidence, but it freaked me out for sure. It definitely had me questioning whether it was an overactive imagination or a shared experience. Story 8. I have 3 kids, an eldest daughter and 2 younger sons. When my daughter was around 4, she started talking about things that, at the time, I just assumed were normal toddler imaginations, except they were a little creepy. She would talk about how, when I was here before, she and her little sister, she was an only child at the time, had drowned. She'd talk about how glad she was to be alive now, but that she missed her sister from before. It freaked me out at first, but kids say weird things, and she completely grew out of it by the time she was 6. By the time she was 10, she didn't even remember saying any of it. I chalked it up to toddler imagination until several years later. When she was around 12, after her second little brother was born, her youngest brother, who was about 4 at the time, suddenly said to me out of nowhere, "Mommy, remember last time when I was a girl, and my big sister and I were on the boat, and I went under the water and I passed away, and big sister too?" I just froze. The first thing I thought was, he's repeating something he could never have known. At 4, he has no concept of past lives, no way to know about things his sister had imagined years before. And yet here he was, describing almost the exact same scenario she had, down to the boat and drowning. It completely shook me. My daughter never mentioned it to him, and he had no way of knowing. To this day, I have no idea how he knew about it, or why he remembered it so vividly. Story 9. At the time, I was a single mom with 1 kid. We had just moved into this surprisingly cheap rental house. The 3rd night there, my 4-year-old daughter told me her sister was very mad at us. Again, she was an only child at that point. 2 nights later, she came running into my bedroom, crying because her sister was giggling in a really scary way. I let her sleep with me, but the next morning when we went into her room so she could change, she asked me if it's normal for there to be so much blood on the walls. I packed our stuff in the car, and we moved out on our 6th day there. I had no one else to turn to except my brother, with whom I had a very poor relationship at the time, but I called and asked for help. He was very surprised when he found out it wasn't just a relapse, and so he offered to go back a couple of days later with a friend and get the rest of our stuff. He said the landlord was upset we moved so quickly, but that he'd been having problems keeping tenants for more than a couple of months at a time. His friend told me he offered the landlord to come back in a few nights and burn the place to the ground. Story 10. When my cousin was about 3, he kept talking to my aunt about something he called Grandma's Angel Bell. The strange part was that his grandmother, my aunt's mom, my own grandmother, had died before he was born. At first, my aunt brushed it off, but he kept bringing it up so casually, like it was something he just knew. Eventually, she mentioned it to my grandfather. During a visit, he opened a drawer in an old desk and pulled out a small bell with a handle shaped like an angel. He handed it to my cousin and asked, "Is this what you meant?" My cousin's face lit up. It was exactly the one. The unsettling part, my grandfather swore he had never seen that bell before and had only found it sitting on the desk that very day. Now, the most likely explanation is that my cousin had been snooping around and found it at some point before, then made the connection in his head. But at 3 years old, he wasn't tall enough to open that desk drawer on his own. Maybe his sister or one of the older cousins had found it and told him about it, but no one remembered ever seeing it, and his sister had been just a baby when their grandma passed, so she couldn't have known anything about it either. To this day, no one knows where that angel bell came from, or how my cousin knew to call it grandma's. Story 11. I was driving one afternoon with my granddaughter in the back seat. She was maybe 3 or 4, old enough to speak in full sentences, but still so little. Out of nowhere, she started talking about things that sounded like past life memories. She'd say things like, "When I was a teenager, I went to dances with my boyfriend," or "When I was a mom, my daughter and I," and then go on with oddly specific details. It didn't sound like pretend play. She spoke about it like she was recalling something real. One day, I took her to Dairy Queen. We were sitting across from each other, eating lunch, when she suddenly lit up, pointed, and said, "Oh, look at those kids playing over there. They're brother and sister." I turned around and looked everywhere, inside, outside, but there weren't any kids. The place was practically empty. I asked, "Where do you see them?" And she kept pointing, insisting, "Right there, Grandma. I want to go play with them." We finished our food, and by the time we left, her friends were gone. She acted like it was completely normal while I sat there with chills running down my arms. And it wasn't just that one time. There were other car rides, other conversations where she'd casually mention memories that couldn't have been hers. The strangest part was years later, when she was older, and I asked if she remembered talking about when she was a mom, or the kids at Dairy Queen. She just looked at me, confused, shook her head and said no, like it had never happened. I still get goosebumps thinking about it. Story 12. My son was about 4 at the time and had this habit of loudly announcing whenever he needed to use the bathroom. He'd always yell, "I have to go potty," and then toddle off down the hall. One afternoon, he does his usual announcement and disappears toward the bathroom. Maybe 10 seconds later, he comes back, dead serious, and says, "There's already someone in the bathroom." Now, I knew for a fact it was just the two of us home. My stomach dropped, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. Trying to stay calm, I asked, "What do you mean?" He just looked at me and repeated, in the same flat, matter-of-fact tone, "There's already someone in the bathroom." At this point, my mind is spinning. Am I about to find some sixth sense ghost standing there? Or is there an actual intruder hiding in my house? Maybe even a hockey mask-wearing psycho straight out of a horror movie? So, naturally, I do what any responsible adult would do. I grab the biggest knife from the block and tell my son to stay put. My heart's pounding in my chest as I inch toward the bathroom. I take a quick peek around the corner. Nothing. The door's open, lights off, dead quiet. Step by step, I move closer to the shower. I reach out, take a deep breath, and in one motion, yank the curtain back. It was empty. I'm standing there gripping the kitchen knife like I'm in a horror movie, trying to process what just happened when my son strolls around the corner, completely calm. I ask, "Where exactly did you see the person?" He points into the bathroom right at the toilet. "See? Someone's already here." I look closer. The toilet's unflushed. Turns out his big brother had just forgotten to flush. Story 13. So my twin cousins had an imaginary friend named Jamie. When they were toddlers, they talked about him constantly, like he was just another member of the family. At first, everyone assumed it was normal twin play, just kids with wild imaginations. One afternoon, I was babysitting them. Both were just shy of 4. Twin B finished lunch first and practically begged me to come play in their bedroom at the far end of the house. Twin A stayed behind at the kiddie table, still eating her lunch. So Twin B and I head down the hall to their room. As soon as we step inside, he starts running in circles, laughing, saying he's chasing Jamie. Then he suddenly stops, looks up at me seriously, and says, "Jamie's so excited to see you." Playing along, I crouch down like I'm grabbing something out of the air and say, "Got you, Jamie?" Without missing a beat, Twin B points straight at the open bedroom door leading into the hallway and corrects me. "You missed. Jamie went out there." Right then, at that exact moment, we hear Twin A scream from the other side of the house. I freeze. From the kitchen, she yells, "Jamie, you scared me. No running." Here's the thing. There was no way she could have heard her brother. No way she could have seen him point toward the hallway. She was all the way at the other end of the house, still sitting at the table. My stomach dropped faster than it ever has in my life. I scooped them both up and got us outside into the front yard. I was not about to deal with Jamie alone in that house. We stayed out there until my boyfriend got home, and I refused to step back inside without another adult with me. To this day, I still have no idea who or what Jamie was. Story 14. I used to be the director of an after-school program at an elementary school. Mid-year, we got a first-grade student, Abby, who was very challenging. She was fun and smart as long as she was in charge, but incredibly bossy and stubborn. Ask her to do anything she didn't want to, and she would completely lose it. I worked closely with her parents, and the inclusion specialist. Her parents seemed great, dedicated to supporting her and working with therapists. Abby could be destructive, would run into traffic, bully other kids, and get violent with teachers. Honestly, that part wasn't unusual. I'd seen plenty of kids with similar behaviors over my years in education. It was a big reason I eventually left, but it wasn't out of the ordinary. What really shook me was one afternoon during outside time. Abby was on the swing with another first grader, a really sweet, gentle girl who I'm positive hadn't prompted this conversation at all. I was nearby, taking a breather and just watching everyone play. Out of nowhere, Abby turns to the other girl and asks if she wants to hear her plan, and then she starts describing in chilling detail how she's going to attack her parents. She explains the exact time of night she plans to do it, how she'll wait for them to go to bed, mentions a big knife her mom keeps in the garage, and how she'll sneak through the house. She even outlines backup plans in case her parents wake up or notice her. She described it in sickening detail. It was deeply unsettling. I couldn't tell if she was trying to shock the other girl or if she actually meant it. I told her dad at pickup. He seemed oddly unfazed, so I left it. That was a couple of years ago. I ran into her mom recently, so at least I know she never carried it out. Story 15. My son, who is both autistic and has ADHD, has always been a little tuned in, I guess you could say. From about age 4 to 7, he had an imaginary friend. He always described him as an older boy, and for the most part, it was typical imaginary friend stuff. Talking, playing games, inventing stories, nothing unusual. But when I was pregnant with my daughter, everything changed. He became devastated. He told me his friend had to leave. When I asked why, he said he has to go play with other kids who don't have anyone to play with. He was heartbroken for a long time. The grief he showed felt so real, like he had genuinely lost someone. That wasn't the only time he gave me chills. One night he was staying at my mom's house, and she asked if he wanted to go out with her to get dinner. He refused, saying he had a bad feeling about it. That very night, my mom was in a serious accident. Someone ran a red light and completely totaled her car. She ended up in critical condition. Later, when she told me the story, she said she couldn't stop thinking about his comment, that bad feeling. And then there was the night he came out of his room, absolutely sobbing. Through tears, he said, "Granddad passed away, Mummy." He had to leave to go to his fire truck. We were confused. Everything seemed fine, but less than 12 hours later, we got the call. My husband's grandfather had passed away overnight. The kicker? He'd been a volunteer firefighter in his younger years. I don't know what's going on with my kid, but sometimes he freaks me out in ways I just can't explain. Story 16. I was playing with my godson one afternoon. He was about 4, and we had this goofy little game going where he was the fish and I was the fisherman, trying to catch him in a net, really just his blanket. He'd flop around, I'd catch him, he'd laugh, and wriggle free. Totally normal kid stuff. Until it wasn't. Right in the middle of playing, he suddenly stops and says, very matter-of-factly, "Since I'm a fish, I should go in the oven." I kind of laughed it off. Dark, sure, but kids say weird things all the time. So the next time I caught him, I played along. Okay, the fish is going in the oven. Oh no, the fish escaped. Then he looks me straight in the eyes, face completely serious, and says, "If you really want to cook me in the oven, you have to off me first." I just froze. My brain couldn't even process what I'd just heard. I managed to stammer, "Excuse me, what?" Then tried to recover with something like, "Well, I don't ever want to end you. We're just playing a game." Without missing a beat, he calmly replies, "Fine. If you want to eat the fish, you have to inject me with a needle that makes me go to sleep. Then I'll be asleep in the oven, and I'll pass away, and you can eat me." At this point, my brain was screaming, "What the heck?" Later, I figured the needle part might have come from the fact that his dad is an anesthetist. Somewhere along the way, he must have heard about that job. But the whole combination of oven plus inject me first was a lot. And then just to top it off, later that same day, he casually asked, "If a fish passes away, can it come back to life again?" It can, right? So, either he had no real grasp of what passing away meant, or he knew way more than I do. Story 17. Used to work in a preschool, so weird and creepy things from kids weren't unusual. But one incident from 2 years ago still sticks with me. Our classroom had a small kitchenette area for pretend play. Kids would play house, cook, whatever they wanted. There was one little girl I kept an eye on because she was very withdrawn. She often played quietly by herself. One day I noticed her in the kitchenette with a baby doll. She was rocking it back and forth, singing softly. Totally normal, innocent play. Then, out of nowhere, she grabbed the doll, shoved it into the play oven, slammed the door shut, and in the creepiest little girl voice I've ever heard said, "Sometimes baby Jews go on a timeout." She smiled and ran off as if nothing had happened. I was frozen, didn't even know how to react at first. Later, I learned her parents were hardcore anti-Semites and had been teaching her that the Holocaust was good. It completely freaked me out. Kids say bizarre things sometimes, but that one still haunts me. Story 18. At the time, my middle son was around 5, and like many kids, he had an imaginary friend. At first, I didn't think much of it, but whenever we asked what the friend's name was, he'd rattle off some strange gibberish that always ended with mom. Not Tom or Sam, literally mom. Now here's the weird part. You'd think his imaginary friend would be another kid, right? A little boy or girl he could play with? Nope, it was a grown woman. A fully grown woman. I brushed it off for a while, until one day I was in the room with him and he suddenly started yanking his arm back, like someone was grabbing him. He was crying, screaming at the top of his lungs. "Stop touching me, you're hurting me." I said, "Don't touch me." This child ran straight into my arms, shaking. Now, I'm a pretty spiritual person, sensitive too, and in that moment I knew we needed to set some boundaries. Out loud, I told the friend they were not allowed to touch us, scare us, take anything from our bodies, follow us home, or leave with us from any new place. If we could see them, fine, but only from a distance. My son didn't fully understand, but he repeated every single rule after me. And not timidly either. He was angry. He wanted this friend to know he was serious. After that day, he never mentioned her again. Story 19. This one came straight from my dad. Back when my sisters were little, my parents had a cat they absolutely adored. Total family pet. Spoiled, slept on the beds, you get the picture. One night, as my folks were getting ready for bed, my dad tried to shoo the cat off the covers so he and my mom could sleep. Instead of hopping down like normal, the cat suddenly went into what my dad described as a full-blown seizure. Its eyes rolled back, it convulsed violently, hissing and spitting at the same time, and lost control of its bladder and bowels. My parents just froze, not knowing what to do. Sadly, the poor cat didn't survive the night. The next morning, my dad grabbed a shoebox, gently put the cat inside, and set it on the top shelf of the hall closet. He figured he'd bury it later that day when things had settled down. Nobody had told my sisters yet. They were 4 and 3 at the time, and my parents wanted to wait until they had the right words to explain it. At breakfast, my oldest sister asked casually where the cat was. Not wanting to traumatize her over cereal, my dad said something like, "Oh, she must have gotten out last night. We don't know where she is." Before anyone could say anything else, my younger sister, maybe 3 at the time, stopped mid-bite, set her spoon down, looked my dad straight in the eye, and said in a flat, matter-of-fact voice, "No, she's sleeping in the box you put her in the closet." My dad said the room went dead silent. She just sat there staring at him, completely serious, with this cold, dead-eyed, almost accusatory look, like she knew. Then, just as suddenly, she picked her spoon back up and went right back to eating her cereal, like nothing had happened. Later, my dad realized she must have woken up during the cat's final commotion, snuck out of bed and watched him put the cat in the box. She hadn't said a word until that morning, but he swears to this day that the way she said it and the look on her face gave him absolute chills. It didn't feel like she was just telling him what she saw. It felt like she was calling him out. Story 20. This happened about 15 years ago when I was a young teenager babysitting 2 little girl sisters, probably around 3 and 4 years old. I was their regular sitter. One day, we were just playing with toys when the older sister suddenly broke into a cold sweat and started shaking. I asked what was wrong, and she said, "The blue goat." I asked what that meant, and she said the blue goat was bad, that it sometimes watched them. At that point, the younger sister started freaking out too. I was seriously weirded out and asked, "Where's the blue goat right now?" They both said in unison, "In the suitcase." I was so tripped out, I honestly thought there was some ghost crap going on. When the girl's mom came home, I told her what had happened, and she just laughed it off. She explained that the blue goat was one of the puppets from their Baby Einstein videos, and the suitcase was just a felt CD holder where they kept the DVDs. For some reason, the girls had decided one day that they were terrified of that particular puppet and would scream and cry whenever he showed up on the screen. Kids are wild. I still wonder what made them think that puppet was some kind of demonic entity. Story 21. I had a student when I was teaching preschool who suddenly became obsessed with the baby dolls we had. He kept bringing them over to me, asking me to show him how to put on the pretend diaper and clothing so he can help mommy with his baby sister. This surprised me. He was an only child. I asked, "Oh, is there a new baby coming to your house?" He lit up and animatedly told me all about the new baby sister he was going to have, how he was going to be a good big brother, and how he wanted to help his mommy and daddy take care of her. During pickup, I gave mom and dad the usual rundown and mentioned that he'd been really interested in the baby dolls, asking me to show him how to dress and diaper them, since parents often like to extend classroom activities at home. Mom gave a little smirk and asked if he'd said anything else. I told her, well, yeah, he was dead set on practicing for his baby sister. She paused, then said she was actually expecting and that they'd told him a week ago there was going to be a baby brother or sister, but he hadn't reacted at all. They were also too early to know whether it was a boy or a girl. Time went on and I moved to a different school, but I stayed in touch with a lot of the families. One day, I got a birth announcement in the mail. Surprise, it was a baby girl. The little guy was only 3 going on 4, and somehow he just knew. Story 22. A little backstory, my biological dad passed away when I was a kid. It wasn't due to depression, just his own reckless choices. When I became a parent, one of the things that really saddened me was knowing my child would never get to meet him. Honestly, I was angry at him for robbing both of us of that. When my daughter was a toddler, maybe 2 or 3, she went through a phase of waking up in the middle of the night. I'd hear her on the baby monitor, not crying, but giggling and chatting. She'd go quiet for a bit, then I'd catch her saying things like, okay, bye now, or okay, sleep, sleep. It happened often enough that I figured she had an imaginary friend. Creepy but harmless. Then, one day, we were driving somewhere, just the 2 of us in the car. She was in the back seat, chatting away as usual, when suddenly, she went quiet and then started to sound upset. I asked what was wrong, and she said she wouldn't be able to see the man anymore. Naturally, I asked, what man? She said, completely serious, the man who always keeps me company when you're driving. I tried to play it cool and asked if he was there right now. She nodded and said yes, but that he was going away now. And from then on, she'd have to sit in the back seat by herself. I'm not religious or spiritual at all, but to this day, I can't shake the feeling that maybe my dad did get to meet my kid after all. Story 23. When my son was about 4, he went through a phase where he said a lot of unusual things. Stuff that honestly made me wonder if kids really do have memories of past lives or some kind of connection to things we can't see. For several months, he talked constantly about his 3 brothers. These weren't real siblings. He's an only child, but to him, they were as real as anyone else. He'd tell us what they liked, what they didn't like, the things they did together, even little stories about them. It was so consistent and detailed that we eventually just accepted it as part of his imagination. Then one day, I realized he hadn't mentioned them in a while. Out of curiosity, I asked, hey, what happened to your brothers? You haven't talked about them lately. He looked at me completely casually, like it was no big deal, and said, oh, they passed away. I think they were alive a long time ago, but they passed away. They said they were going to be someone else's brothers now. He was at an age when he had no real understanding of death or the concept of the past. He hadn't been exposed to that kind of language, and yet he said it so matter-of-factly that it gave me chills. It's been years, and I still think about it all the time. Story 24. I was at work one day, standing at the cash register, just zoning out and watching 2 little kids run around the store. They looked like siblings. The younger one, maybe 3. The older one around 4. I'm terrible at guessing ages, but they were definitely still in the toddler preschool range. They were playing a chaotic little game of tag, laughing, chasing each other, full of that boundless energy kids have. Then the younger one, like toddlers do, suddenly babbled something in pure gibberish. You know how little kids string together sounds that sound intentional, like they're trying to communicate, but it comes out as nonsense? That's what he did. I expected the older one to just laugh and keep running, but instead, he froze, full stop, dead in his tracks. His whole face shifted. One second, he was just a kid playing tag, and the next, he looked serious, way too serious for a 4-year-old. He let out a long sigh and said, in the saddest, most resigned little voice, I used to know what that meant. I just keep not knowing those words anymore. I swear it was like watching a grown man grieve. The way he said it was so heavy. Not a kid joking around, not pretend play, but like he was actually mourning something real. It gave me chills right there at the register. It honestly felt like I had just witnessed a child remembering what it was like to understand a language he doesn't know anymore. Maybe from when he was younger, maybe from before he could talk, or maybe, and this is what I couldn't stop thinking, from before this life altogether. I've always suspected that baby babble and toddler gibberish are their own kind of language that kids really are communicating, and adults just lose the ability to understand it as they grow. Hearing that little boy say it out loud with that much sadness almost confirmed it for me. The way his voice broke when he said it, it honestly still haunts me. Story 25. For some reason, my usually easygoing kid was giving me a hard time getting ready for school that morning. I got the other kids ready, dropped them off, and came back home. I sat on the couch and started messaging a lady on Facebook about something I was going through when my kid peeked around the kitchen corner and said timidly, "Mom, I'm seeing things." When I asked what they meant, they told me that while I was gone, they'd been in my room and saw a black, shadowy person looking in at them, said it had even put its hand on the doorframe or something. I'd been messaging the lady because, ever since my husband left, I'd felt several evil spirits come into our home and was asking her for advice. I hadn't told or even hinted to any of my kids about the experiences I'd been having for the past few years. So, when my kid told me what they saw, I was internally shaken. It broke my heart to think they might be getting pulled into it too. I hated even having to talk about it or explain what it could be, but I made sure to stay calm and act completely normal. I made sure to tell them not to say anything to their siblings. Kids are so easily influenced, and the last thing I wanted was for the others to start claiming they were seeing things too. The next day, my kid pulled me aside and said they needed to talk. We went into the bathroom, and I locked the door so we'd have some privacy. They looked up at me, eyes wide, and whispered with this mix of wonder and disbelief, "Mom, they have hands like us." Story 26. About 10 years ago, I was studying to become a teacher. I never actually finished, and we were putting on a Christmas play at the local church. You know the usual stuff, toddlers dressed as angels, shepherds, Mary and Joseph, and the whole nativity scene. I was helping the toddlers get into their costumes, specifically the little angel wings. There were about 50 toddlers in a damp, dimly lit lower-level room of the church, and some corners of it were barely lit at all. Naturally, it was chaos. Hyper kids running everywhere, crying, tugging at each other, trying to poke each other with wings. Total toddler madness. After about 15 minutes of wrestling tiny wings onto hyperactive kids, I noticed one kid, Kevin, standing completely still in a particularly dim corner. I walked over and said, "Hey Kevin, what are you up to? We have to go in a couple of minutes." He didn't look at me, just stared at the wall. And then, in the calmest, clearest voice, he said, "Oh, I am just ruminating about my sins with this bearded man." I blinked. There was absolutely no one else in the room. I was the only adult who had been down there that evening, and the room was too chaotic for any other adult to be hiding anywhere. I glanced down at his wings. They were perfectly in place, secured with safety pins, something a toddler could not have done on their own. Kevin looked up at me and said, very matter-of-factly, "The bearded man helped me with my wings, but only if I shared my sins with him." I didn't know how to respond. I just nodded awkwardly and walked away. The kid was completely serious, calm, and totally unbothered by the fact that he was talking to nobody. Even now, thinking back on it gives me chills. That wasn't just imagination, it was too specific, too structured, and too impossible for a toddler to orchestrate on their own. Story 27. One Thanksgiving a few years back, I was hanging out with my cousin's youngest. He was around 5 at the time. We're sitting at the table, and he's drawing with crayons. Just normal kid stuff. I ask him casually, "Hey, can you draw me your favorite animal?" He stops, thinks for a second, and then instead of drawing a cat, a dog, or literally any animal ever, he just starts scribbling these huge black circles, like page-filling, the ring-style circles. I kind of stare at it for a second, and I go, "Wow, okay, so what kind of animal is that?" Without even looking up, this 5-year-old just goes, "The dark of nowhere." Excuse me? What? I just sort of sat there like an idiot, because what the heck do you even say to that? While I'm still processing, his older brother, 7 years old, sitting nearby, pipes up super casually, like he's giving me a weather report. "Oh, don't worry, the dark of nowhere is just like a man, who's like a shadow." "Oh, cool, that helps. Thanks, buddy." Now, before anyone says this sounds made up, I swear on everything that this happened exactly like this. It probably makes more sense if I explain that their mom is a total horror movie fanatic. Like, these kids have been watching creepy stuff since birth, so it wasn't totally shocking they'd say something like that. But I'm still not over the way he said it so casually. Like, the dark of nowhere was just a perfectly normal answer to my favorite animal. Story 28. When I was around 20 or 21, I used to hang out at my friend Stephanie's house a lot. Her little sister Katie was probably 6 at the time and would often be playing in another room while we did our own thing. One day, I went over, and Katie was playing with one of her Barbies. Stephanie and I were playing Dr. Mario, a classic household staple for her family, and her mom was ridiculously good at it, which was always a little intimidating. After a few minutes, Katie comes over and asks if we're going to play for much longer because she wants me to play with her. Stephanie says we'll be playing for a while. Then Katie looks at me, dead serious, and says, "Let me know when you're done because she's just gonna stare at you until you come to play with us." Stephanie and I freeze. Both of us are like, "What? Who?" Katie shrugs, completely nonchalant, and says, "Just hurry up and play with me." Then she wanders off like nothing happened. To this day, Katie insists she has no idea what we're talking about. but we both know exactly what we heard. Even after all these years, just thinking about it still gives me chills. Story 29. When I was 8, I had a new babysitter. She was a teenager. Right after my parents left for the evening, she asked me in this very pleasant, casual tone, "All right, where's the stuff your daddy drinks before he hits your mommy?" I remember being completely confused. My home was normal and stable. My parents had a good marriage, and there was never any abuse or anything like that. So I said, "I don't know, my dad doesn't hit my mom." She froze for a moment. The rest of the night, until my parents came home, she was awkwardly quiet. I never saw her again after that. It's only recently, as an adult, that the memory resurfaced, and with it came a chilling realization. She was speaking from her own experience. That was her reality. Thinking about it now makes me feel incredibly grateful for the stable, loving childhood I had. But it also makes me sad and reflective, realizing how easily some kids are forced to grow up with trauma that we can't even imagine. It's a small memory, but it stayed with me, partly because it was unsettling as a kid, and partly because it taught me, even in hindsight, to never take a safe, loving home for granted. Story 30. My son was very disturbed. From a young age, we all knew it. They wanted to medicate him before age 2. He was in his first of many psychiatric inpatient treatment for hurting his sister when he was 4. You name it. Fire starting, cruelty to animals, biting, attacking other children. When he was 8, he was playing alone in his room. I was divorced and his sisters were with their dad. I could hear him talking and something seemed off. To this day, I don't know what it was. Just something made me sneak down that hallway to listen. It chills me to the bone to this day, almost 30 years later. He was talking to someone. His end of the conversation was this, after a delay between each sentence, as if answering questions. "No, I don't want to, because I don't. No, I said I don't want to, because they're my family." That's the one that made me open the door. He was sitting on the floor, playing with his cars. I asked who he was talking to. He said him, and pointed, without even looking up from his cards. Nothing happened next, at least then. He denied saying anything, even the word him. He insisted he was just making vroom noises the whole time. As for later down the road, you probably wouldn't believe me anyway. Story 31. I'm rock climbing indoors on a wall with 2 auto belays. On my right is a small girl, maybe 5 years old. Out of courtesy, I let her start first. It's a friendly gym where climbers often cheer each other on. "Nice job," I say as she begins climbing. She's on an open route, using any holds she wants. I start my own climb, focused on figuring out the sequence. About 15 feet up, I spot her small foot just ahead to my right. I pause and wait for her to move higher. "Keep going, you're doing great," I encourage. "You aren't going to live," she replies calmly. I freeze. What did she just say? Surely I misheard her. She's just a sweet little kid. I shake it off and keep climbing. By the time I reach about 22 feet, I pause again, and from just a few feet away, I hear it once more, clear as day. "You aren't going to live." My mind was racing. Why would a little kid say something so strange? I decided not to engage. She was young and matter of fact, not rude, so I simply nodded and kept climbing. Around 32 feet, I realized she was slowing me down. I should pass her at the next safe opportunity. I visualized my next moves, then she cut through my concentration again. "You aren't going to live." Now, I was genuinely confused. Why keep saying that? As I moved to pass, her words kept looping in my head. I smiled as I came alongside and asked, "Why are you saying that?" "You aren't going to live. You aren't going to live," she repeated. I climb a bit higher, preparing for the hardest move on the route. A route I know well, one I even set myself, called Han Solo in Carbonite. I'm about 45 feet up. Before the crux, I pause to re-chalk my hands. It's a move I sometimes stick, sometimes don't. One last time, her words echo in my head. Why is she saying this? I freeze, my breathing stops, and then it hits me, the childlike meaning behind her words. Slowly, carefully, I start climbing down. I move steadily, breathing in and out, keeping my focus. I pass the girl, who's still climbing upward, and continue descending until I finally touch the ground. Heart pounding, I walk over to get some water, feeling the blood drain from my face. I glance back at the wall and realize the truth. The little girl's warning wasn't strange at all. I hadn't clipped my harness into the auto belay. I'd been free climbing 45 feet up with no safety line. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.